Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring, and joining me today is the new director of the Phoenix Aviation Department, Jim Bennett. Hey Jim, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I know you're still getting settled. We were just talking about your less than permanent housing situation and so forth, so you are as new and fresh as possible, but it is not your first tour in Phoenix. So I was hoping you'd just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, your long history in aviation. I'm personally pleased with your hire just because we have had non-aviation people running our airport during my tenure on the council, and I think this is a good step in the right direction, have someone with your vast experience in this industry. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, certainly. And first, thank you for inviting me to be here.
Our
I
pleasure.
appreciate this opportunity. It's a great way to start my fourth week as the, as the aviation director with the city. But as you mentioned, I've been in the aviation business, airport management specifically, my entire career. And
you told me this was your childhood dream.
Exactly. I'm one of those strange people that somehow fell in love with airports in the aviation industry, and I've been doing this my entire career. My undergraduate degree is in aviation management, and I've worked at airports both small and large, both domestic and internationally, as either a CEO or an aviation director or the number 2 slot in these airports. Smallest one that I've ever managed as a CEO was the one in Flint, Michigan, north of Detroit. And then the largest system that I ever had the opportunity to manage was Washington, D.C., Reagan National Airport, Dulles International, and the Dulles Toll Road. And then international experience, I was the CEO of the Abu Dhabi Airports Company in the Middle East for 3 years. So it's been a terrific career. Now, as it relates to Phoenix, I was the assistant aviation director here in Phoenix from the late 80s up until the mid 1996. And that's when I went to Washington, D.C. So it's great to do a return here to the Valley. And it's always been a dream of mine to get back to Arizona. I loved it so much when I was here, and it's exciting to be back once again.
Well, we're happy to have you here. The city manager is actually the one who selects the aviation director, but when I was told about your credentials, you not only had the experience, but you knew our airport because you'd been here for approximately 10 years. As you said, it's been a while,
right?
But at least you know about the operations and so forth. I bet it's changed a lot. What do you see? I mean, the magnitude of the operation just on its face. I think the busiest day we've ever had, wasn't that the day after the Super Bowl?
I believe it probably was. And you know, we're on tap this year to probably have the busiest year in the history of the airport.
And there'd been a pretty serious drop during the Great Recession.
Yeah. So we're back. I think 2007 was the prior peak year, and we've kind of went down extremely low for a couple of years right after the 2007-2008 recession. And this year we should usurp the numbers that we had back in the peak. So we're back, and we continue to see growth in our future.
Now, of course, there are already projects, et cetera, in the pipeline at the airport already prior to your tenure. We were voting on things, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, but I'm also curious your thoughts going forward, what specific plans you have to make it just a better experience for both people who live here on the ground and people who are flying out of the airport.
Well, the one thing about an airport, they're always under construction. and that's really for a couple of reasons. One is growth. You know, the airport continues, aviation continues to grow on a worldwide basis, so you have to be able to keep up with that growth. And the other is the industry changes all of the time. And so you have to constantly refresh and remodel your facilities and services to keep pace with that changing industry. So the exciting project we have underway right now is Terminal 3. It is a Terminal 3 modernization project that once complete will bring Terminal 3 into the modern day standards of the evolving airline industry. So you'll have a consolidated security checkpoint in the terminal building instead of having one at each pier. You'll have a modern open feel and look to the facility that will be a lot more refreshing for the customer. And then we're also incorporating more common use facilities, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything to the public, But to the airlines, what it means is we can put an airline in, we can put one airline on the ticket counter in the morning and then put a different airline on that same ticket counter in the afternoon. So that gives the airport operator the ability to more efficiently manage its space. And the other project that we really are excited about completing is the SkyTrain. And the SkyTrain opened up to Terminal 3 this year. Now we need to finish that all the way out to the west side to the consolidated rental car facility, because that is a very positive contribution to the management of the roadway system at Sky Harbor, and it also improves the level of service to the customer. So we get the SkyTrain completed to the consolidated rental car facility. All of those shuttle buses that you see on the roadway now will come off that roadway. It's a positive for the air quality in the valley. It's a positive for the congestion on the roadway, and it's importantly a positive for the people renting cars. It's a more dependable and frequent service back and forth to the rental car facility.
Now, how about Terminal 2? Obviously, it's quite a bit older. What's the future for that facility?
Well, the concept behind Terminal 2 is that once we finish the Terminal 3 modernization, we will be looking to remove Terminal 2 from the campus. It's kind of reached that age where it doesn't make a lot of sense to put money back into it.
1961, I want to say something like that.
About 62, I believe.
Yeah.
It's very similar to when I was here previously, when we built and opened Terminal 4. After we opened Terminal 4, for the folks that have been around a long time, we moved Southwest Airlines out of Terminal 1, and then we tore down Terminal 1 after Southwest moved into Terminal 4. And for those of you, we had a lot of folks that loved Terminal 1. It was a great old facility.
That was before my time. I missed Terminal 1.
It was one of those that didn't even, it was an outdoor type terminal. You walked up the stairs onto the airplane, and the baggage claim was outside. It was the original terminal in Phoenix.
Well, I'm 47, so I'm not particularly young. I've only done that a handful of times in my life. Some of those out of country. So
a lot of people missed that terminal once it was torn down.
Well, we're anxious to see what happens. Obviously, we get a lot of projects, big capital projects that come before the council and we vote on. So we feel better having someone with your vast experience, as I said.
No, thank you.
Having you guide this ship. We've had some issues, as you know, prior to your tenure. So I don't think anybody in our audience will be blaming you for this. But obviously, we're having issues with the FAA and the overflight issue. Can you talk a little bit about where that's at? What perhaps some of our thinking is going forward about what might happen and what residents can expect?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I think everyone probably knows, the city has a pending lawsuit against the FAA, as well as some community groups also have a pending suit against the FAA over the flight path changes that were made back in September of 2014. So that is still going through the court process in the District of Columbia, and there, as typical with the lawsuits such as this, several motions to consolidate and dismiss, and a lot of papers are being submitted by the lawyers in defense of the various positions. So that's going to continue to run its course for a period of time. But in the meantime, what we're doing, our Assistant Aviation Director, Deb Ostreicher, has been engaging with the community on a continuous basis, trying to give them the information that they need about the noise situation. In fact, we had a public workshop last night. We have another one this evening, and we'll continue to have those workshops in the community moving forward. We're also working with the airlines and the FAA to see if there are not some other options that we might be able to explore on a voluntary basis, where perhaps we could adjust some of the flights on a voluntary basis by the airlines and the FAA. And we're trying to encourage them to consider those options, even though the lawsuit is still pending and a lot of other things working in the background. We want to try to encourage them to voluntarily adjust some of their flying.
Maybe you can talk a little bit, because I don't want to assume our audience, or frankly myself, knows everything there is to know, as you do, about running an airport. So the FAA controls the planes once they're off the ground, and it's your responsibility for what happens on the ground. But once they're up, my understanding is that the FAA takes over completely. But you're saying the airlines would actually have some wiggle room within some parameters, I assume. Is that what I heard?
Well, that's the concept, is to try to get the airlines to work with the FAA and say, we would like to voluntarily change some of these flight paths at certain times in order to improve on the noise situation in the community. But you're right. The FAA is responsible for air traffic control throughout the United States, and not the local airport operator. We get to manage the consequences of, of that, but the FAA is ultimately in charge of that.
Yeah.
And noise is a very personal issue, and it really needs to be handled and managed appropriately. And I really understand what the community is experiencing right now, because when the airport was developed, and this is the curse of having been here before, we went through a very laborious environmental process to identify how airplanes were going to fly in and out of Sky Harbor back in the 90s, and had an environmental impact statement. And that became predictable for the community. Everyone knew at that time, going forward, this is how the airplanes are going to use the airport.
And now really not that many complaints over that period of time.
Well,
People got used to the idea. They knew when they bought their house what to expect. This change has
exactly, and the city and its council and the ordinances and the zoning was all developed around the concept of this is how airplanes would fly in and out of the airport in the future, and that all changed, and it all changed rather suddenly, and that's what we're dealing with, is now how do we fix this problem. So it's a very personal issue. I understand it, and we hope that we're able to bring some improvement to the community.
Obviously, despite the lawsuit, the city, the airport, yourself, you have to work with the FAA. So I assume relations are still good. Obviously, we'd never want or would never expect passenger safety to be impacted in any way. But you must have had a lot of experience being back in Washington. Obviously, FAA is based back there.
Right.
I assume you know the players in the FAA, frankly, more than your predecessors, hopefully, who did not really have the long aviation experience. I hope that you found that to be a benefit in your first month on the job.
Well, I think so. I had the opportunity to meet with the leadership of the FAA even before I started, a week or so before I came out, to address this issue. And I know that it is on their mind, and it is something that they're concerned about. And hopefully, with working with them, we can come up to some kind of resolution to improve on the situation.
Well, they have reached out, at least to my office. I have heard from them. Where we go from here, whether they can make citizens happy or not might be a debatable point, and what they're willing to do. But at least they made some overtures, which were appreciated. You mentioned Deb Ostreicher, and I'm glad you did, because I know she's been going out and meeting the community, and the feedback I've gotten about that has been very good. I think you guys have spent a lot of time trying to educate citizens. Right. We had several community meetings in the spring through my office. Obviously, I'm not an aviation expert, but through the course of several, frankly, rather long meetings with aviation staff, I think we had folks who, by the end, knew more about how this works. FAA controls the airspace, et cetera. One thing that has come up, though, and we are doing a community meeting. I should thank you in advance. We haven't had it yet, but you are coming out to meet with citizens in my district tomorrow. Now, this is not broadcast live, so do not go expecting a meeting tomorrow if you're watching this, because it's on tape. So, but I'll appreciate again in advance that you're doing that. I'm sure citizens will have really good questions. One of the ones that you're likely to get is discussions about how we interact with other cities' airports. Scottsdale primarily in my area, but I know we have interactions across the board. I want to talk a little bit about how that works between you, the FAA, and we'll use Scottsdale as an example. How does that all, so we make changes, I assume that then impacts Scottsdale, and the FAA oversees it. Can you just talk a little bit about how that works?
Sure. I mean, it can. If changes are made with the way airplanes fly in and out of any airport, you have to look at the entire region. And a change, for instance, that is made at Sky Harbor might influence what takes place at Scottsdale or Mesa or Glendale or Deer Valley or Goodyear or any of the other airports in the valley. And we've been hearing, and thank you for bringing it to our attention, some of the concerns about Scottsdale. And to be honest with you, we're still trying to find out whether or not the changes that people are believing has taken place at Scottsdale, whether those are the result of what took place at Sky Harbor or not. And the FAA is not sure either. We had a meeting with the FAA last week on that issue, and we're trying to get more information from them.
And I have asked questions about that because I've had concerns from residents who say, we're seeing planes, they're not Sky Harbor planes, they're Scottsdale planes, but we only saw them after the changes that took place. I think it was September 14th or something of 2014 at Sky Harbor. So I know every flight is tracked, correct? If it's up in the air, certainly in the post 9/11 area for sure. I mean, I know that I've seen the grids, and you're monitoring every plane, and I know you're still trying to figure out have the routes around Scottsdale changed in any kind of impactful fashion. So I know what to tell residents. The awkwardness, of course, for me is I'm on the Phoenix City Council, and we don't control the Scottsdale Airport. I'm sure we can make requests, but those have not necessarily always been honored. And just sharing a border like we do with the airport right on the other side of the border, I live over in that area too, so I understand what people are saying. There's just, how do you interact with your counterparts in other cities? So it sounds like there is some wiggle room within the parameters the FAA sets. Do you ever make requests about, could you change this flight or that flight? Is that typical?
It has been done in the past, right. And it's from time to time. Even the airport operators. We all work together. There's an Arizona Airport Association, sure. And there's even Valley Airport operators get together from time to time and share these common issues. And sometimes, we have to get together and ask the FAA to make changes, not only for Scottsdale, but also because of the benefits of Phoenix. So yes, we do all work together from an airport operator standpoint.
Right, but I think there's a misperception that Phoenix, our airport, is bigger than everybody else's airport, that we tell other airports what to do, and that simply isn't the case.
It does not work that way.
And really, back to our point earlier about the FAA controlling the airspace, you don't really even control the airspace. If the FAA says you got to make this change, you pretty much have to make it. Is that a fair reading of it?
They make that change.
They make the change, and then they tell you.
We don't make the change.
Right, well, I understand. Sorry,
they make the change.
Yeah.
And we try to influence that, but ultimately it's their decision, because they're running, not to defend them, but they're running a national system.
Sure.
And a change in Phoenix can impact the nationwide system. So this has to be vetted in that context. It's
Is that another way of saying it's complicated? There's a lot of planes in the air and a lot
It's extremely complicated. Yeah. Extremely complicated.
How many, you mentioned earlier this would probably be a record year. How many planes do we have landing, and how many passengers do we have coming through our airport?
Well, this year we will probably do about 44 million total passengers through Sky Harbor. And you think about the population of the Valley, what, 4.5 million
right.
people, so that's about
10 times,
10 times
yep.
the population of the Valley will come and go through Sky Harbor this year.
Now, do you think that's a spike, the Super Bowl and event related, or is it just a general uptick again?
It's just a general uptick as the underlying economics around the country and in the Valley and in Arizona have improved. There's more demand for the air travel. And we've seen some of the smaller airplanes being replaced with larger airplanes as the airlines try to add a little additional capacity. So we just have a fairly strong market right now.
If you want to see the impact of the economy, we can just look at your charts, which I have, of where we were at, say, in 2007,
right.
and the precipitous drop in passenger traffic, which has a ripple effect in businesses and housing, and just a whole host of areas in the Valley. For those who say maybe we should curtail the airport's operations or slow it down, that would have a pretty severe impact on not just Phoenix's economy, but the state's economy as well.
Right.
It's something that certainly I've observed. Obviously, you talked about the airport changing and operations changing. One thing now that's been in the news recently is Uber and Lyft and other like businesses going to the airport, picking up customers. Can you talk a little bit about where that's at? Because obviously those are very popular I have not used them myself, but those are very popular transportation models in other cities. Maybe just talk a little bit about what we can expect going forward.
Well, absolutely. We've been working, our staff has been engaging with the transportation network companies. That's they call them TNCs, Transportation Network Companies.
Another acronym.
Another acronym.
I'll write it down and remember.
You have to learn your acronyms.
That's right.
And that's a new one from me. But we've been engaging with them for some time now, trying to address some of their concerns and hopefully have them understand some of our concerns. We want Uber and Lyft to be able to pick up at the airport. I mean, that's a very popular transportation system. I myself am a user of those systems and have accounts with a couple of companies in that space. And so we welcome that type of service at the airport. But we've got a little sticking point that we continue to have dialogue with them over, and that is on the background checks for the people that are authorized to pick up at the airport. Right now, city code requires a fingerprint-based background check for taxi cab drivers and other operators that are picking up at the airport.
And does that include the shuttle services from hotels and so forth?
Well, it would include super shuttles and taxi cabs and limousine drivers, the black sedan services and those kind of things. So it requires a background investigation that's fingerprint-based. And we very much believe that should also extend to these transportation network companies if they're going to be picking up at the airport. And the transportation network companies don't do that level of a background investigation on their drivers. They only do what's referred to as a name-based background investigation and not a fingerprint-based. So that's kind of one of the obstacles that we're trying to work with them over. Try to see if there's a middle ground that is acceptable to both parties. Now, we were in front of the Downtown Aviation Redevelopment Subcommittee for an update last week, and they requested that we go look at all of the transportation providers at the airport and make sure that whatever we do, that we come back with a proposal that provides a level playing field so that everyone is treated the same that is providing ground transportation services. So we're in the process of doing that right now.
Now, if you take Uber or Lyft, one of these TNCs,
right.
One of these companies, if you take those, you can take them to the airport. I think what we're prohibiting right now is a dedicated spot for pickup. Is that a fair?
You can actually you could today, unless they've decided to block it, you could be picked up at the airport with Uber, but not what's referred to as Uber X. You could have an Uber, a sedan service where you have a licensed black sedan or black car service driver that has gone through the background investigation and the fingerprinting and participates with Uber. They could pick you up today, and like I said, unless they've decided to block those services. What is at issue here is what they refer to as kind of their Uber X service, which is essentially yourself. If you decided you wanted to become an Uber driver, you could decide, I'm out running errands, I'm by the airport, I'm going to turn on my app and make myself available, and you're in your personal vehicle, and someone flies into Phoenix and they go on their phone and request a car, and you drive by in your personal vehicle out front of the airport and you pick them up and take them away somewhere. That's the service that we're struggling over, trying to reach a understanding on background investigations for.
With 44 million people passing through the airport, I'm sure there's a lot of requests, and so I would just encourage, the quicker we can get this up and running, because it is something people get off the plane apparently and are used to just clicking some buttons and they're expecting a ride, and in this day and age, that's the expectation. So.
And once again, we're not trying to prevent the service. We're just trying to make sure that the city standards that have been in place for years and years and years, and that are in city code, that we're treating everyone equally and that the safety and security of the airport, as well as for those arriving guests into Phoenix, is being maintained.
Well, and thank you for working on that. With the $44 million, so traditionally, at least growing up, I was always told, it was kind of Thanksgiving weekend was the big one, obviously around the Christmas season and holidays. What do we see in Phoenix? Are there peak times? Are there peak days? Is it busier on the weekend or during the week? If you had a choice, maybe you were retired or between employment or something and you wanted to fly out, what would you suggest? Since you should have more information about this, you should be flying only at the times that would be the most sensible. So I'm just curious, what would you be suggesting to travelers be about the holidays and also kind of what day of the week, what time's the busiest?
Yeah. Traditionally, I think here in Phoenix, Thursday, I think, is maybe our peak day at the airport is Thursday.
Thursday, I wouldn't necessarily guess that. That's why I asked the question. That's good news.
But, typically, if you're going to make a personal trip, what you want to try to do is travel kind of midweek, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in that time period, and try to avoid weekends, because sometimes you get surges on the weekends, especially if there's a holiday weekend, a 3-day weekend. We all know about the Wednesday before Thanksgiving,
right.
Those kind of things where friends and family are trying to get away. So you do have certain peaks that are experienced. But typically you get the best fares and sometimes the best seating options if you're traveling on those kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and avoid fall break, spring break, and summertime.
Good advice from someone who should know. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate all this information. I think it'll be really great for our viewers. Looking forward to having you out in the district.
Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
No, absolutely. I think this will be fantastic. I think more knowledge now that this is really percolated up as a big issue is better. So appreciate you taking the time. And if you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at phoenix.gov/District 2. And thanks again, Jim. We really appreciate you having you here. And we look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.